Picture this. It's 1997, and one of the world's most famous supermodels is walking down an Yves Saint Laurent runway in Paris. The cameras flash, the audience holds its breath, and Yasmeen moves with that hypnotic walk that made Karl Lagerfeld weak in the knees. What they don't know is that this is goodbye. At 26, at the absolute peak of her career, she's about to do something unthinkable in an industry that worships youth and beauty. She's going to walk away. Not because of scandal, not because of addiction, not because the work dried up. She's leaving because she's too real for a world built on illusion. This is the story of a woman who broke every rule twice. First, by entering fashion as the daughter of a Pakistani imam.
The things that my dad taught me have really, regardless of maybe me not going on the path that he wanted me to go, still affected me. I think that he raised me to, be a good person.
Then by leaving it when everyone expected her to stay forever. Inside a McDonald's on a busy afternoon, 17-year-old Yasmeen is flipping burgers with the kind of precision that made her Employee of the Month. She's tall, striking, and completely unaware that her life is about to change forever. What makes this moment extraordinary isn't just that a future supermodel was working fast food, it's that she wasn't supposed to be there at all. Yasmeen was born into two worlds that should never have met. Her father was a respected imam in Quebec, a Muslim cleric who spent his days teaching faith and devotion. Her mother, Linda, had converted from Catholicism to Islam, embracing a life of modesty and tradition. This wasn't a household where careers and fashion were discussed over dinner. At 12 years old, Yasmeen had completed the Hajj pilgrimage to Mecca with her parents. While other kids her age were worried about school dances, she was walking the holiest sites in Islam, learning about sacrifice and spiritual devotion. The experience shaped her deeply, this idea that some things are sacred, that not everything should be on display. But growing up in Montreal as the only Muslim in her school, Yasmeen felt like she lived between worlds. The kids called her half boy, half girl because she was flat-chested and awkward. She was bullied for her Pakistani heritage, mocked for being different. Her own father was teaching communities about faith while his daughter was learning what it felt like to be an outsider. She later said she saw herself as an ugly duckling, this gangly mixed-race girl who didn't fit anywhere. Pakistani enough to be othered in Canada, Canadian enough to feel foreign when visiting family abroad. She was learning to navigate identity in a way that most teenagers never have to. When hairdresser Edward Zachariah walked into that McDonald's and spotted her behind the counter, he saw something no one else had seen. Not exotic beauty, just potential. Raw, unformed, but undeniably there. The conversation that followed would fracture her family. Her parents' reaction was immediate and devastating. This wasn't about career concerns or safety worries. For her father, his daughter's desire to model was a spiritual crisis. Everything he'd taught her about modesty, about keeping the body covered, about humility, modeling was the opposite of all of it. Yasmeen later said that her father believed she was putting him in jeopardy of going to hell by even considering it. Imagine being 17 and hearing that your dream could damn the person you love most. But she'd spent years feeling invisible, feeling wrong, feeling like she didn't belong anywhere. For the first time, someone was telling her she was beautiful enough to photograph. The girl who'd been called ugly was being offered a chance to redefine beauty, so she chose to break her father's heart. At 17, she left Montreal for Europe, carrying a small suitcase and the weight of her family's disappointment. She was chasing something she couldn't even name yet. Not fame, not money, just the feeling of finally fitting somewhere. Milan, 1989. Yasmeen walks into her first major casting call carrying everything she owns and speaking broken Italian. She's 19, alone, and about to discover that the fashion industry wasn't ready for her any more than her family had been. The rejection was immediate and specific. Canadian casting agents had already told her she was too ethnic. Now, in Europe, she was hearing variations of the same theme. Not white enough for some clients, not exotic enough for others. Too tall, too serious, too real. But there was something about her that kept photographers calling her back. Maybe it was the way she moved, or the sadness she carried in her eyes, or the fact that she treated every job like it mattered. While other models showed up late or hungover, Yasmeen was early, prepared, grateful. The breakthrough came with Jean-Paul Gaultier in 1990. He put her on his runway, and suddenly fashion was paying attention. Her walk wasn't like anyone else's, this fluid, almost serpentine movement that Tyra Banks would later call the walk of life. Tyra said watching Yasmeen move was like seeing her hips were going to dislocate, but somehow it looked effortless, natural.
There was a model by the name of Yasmeen Ghauri. Now, people that know fashion in the 90s, Yasmeen had the walk of life. When she would walk, it was almost like her hips would dislocate. It was like, it was just this weird thing. And then later, she was a Victoria's Secret model. And Yasmeen would not let any makeup artist touch her face.
By 1991, she was walking for Gianni Versace, for Chanel, for designers who'd built their empires on a very specific idea of beauty. And Yasmeen was quietly changing that idea just by existing, but the industry's lack of preparation for her was embarrassing and constant. Makeup artists didn't carry foundation for her olive complexion. She'd show up to shoots and watch them scramble, trying to mix shades, making her skin look gray under the lights. So she learned to do it herself. Picture this. You're booked for a Chanel show. You're about to walk for Karl Lagerfeld himself, and you're in the bathroom 20 minutes before doing your own base makeup because no one thought to accommodate your skin tone. Instead of complaining, instead of making demands, Yasmeen just solved the problem. She bought her own foundation, learned to blend it perfectly, and showed up ready to work. It wasn't activism, it was survival, but it was also quietly revolutionary. She was creating space for herself in an industry that hadn't thought to save any. Her first Elle cover came in January 1991. That same year, she became the face of Christian Dior and Anne Klein. But what made her different wasn't just her look, it was her approach. While other models were building personas, chasing headlines, playing the celebrity game, Yasmeen just worked. She showed up, did the job beautifully, and went home. She didn't badmouth other models, didn't create drama, didn't leak stories to the press. In an industry built on manufactured personalities, she was stubbornly, almost aggressively, herself. By 1992, something had shifted. When Karl Lagerfeld needed someone to open a Chanel show, he chose her. When Patrick de Marchelier wanted to shoot for Vogue, she was his favorite subject. Her signature walk had become fashion legend. The New York Times wrote about her hard-to-get gaze belied by the ball-bearing swivel of her hips. Lagerfeld himself said other girls tried to copy her walk. But it's not easy because no one has the long legs or body of Yasmeen. It was what the walk represented, this perfect fusion of confidence and vulnerability, strength and grace. She moved like someone who knew exactly who she was. She was also making history. When Victoria's Secret signed her in 1992, she became one of the first women of color to be a prominent angel. At a time when the brand's idea of beauty was incredibly narrow, Yasmeen's face in their catalogs was quietly groundbreaking. The covers kept coming: Italian Vogue, French Vogue, British Vogue. Each one featured this woman who looked like no one else on the newsstands, not the blonde, blue-eyed ideal that had dominated fashion for decades, but something more complex, more interesting. Stephen Meisel put her on the cover of Italian Vogue. Azzedine Alaïa became obsessed with dressing her. She was walking in nearly every major show in Paris, Milan, and New York. This was the peak of the supermodel era, when models weren't just faces. They were brands, personalities, cultural forces. And Yasmeen? She was the mysterious one, the one who let her work speak for itself. But even at her peak, there was something different about how she carried success. She didn't move to New York to chase celebrity. She didn't date rock stars or actors. She didn't show up to every party. She was famous for being private in an industry that rewarded exhibitionism, professional in a world that celebrated excess, real in a business built on fantasy. The mid-90s should have been Yasmeen's moment to transform from supermodel to icon, the way Naomi and Cindy and Christy had. This was when models started launching product lines, dating celebrities, building empires beyond the runway. Instead, Yasmeen stayed exactly who she'd always been. While her peers were embracing the full circus of fame, she remained stubbornly grounded. She didn't hire publicists to get her name in Page 6. She didn't date anyone famous enough to generate headlines. She didn't play the game that everyone else was playing. This wasn't strategy, it was authenticity. The same authenticity that had driven her to leave her family's religion, that made her do her own makeup when the industry failed her, that kept her working when others might have given up. Fashion people noticed. Here was someone at the absolute pinnacle of beauty and success who acted like success hadn't changed her at all. She was still the polite, hard-working girl from Montreal who showed up early and said thank you. Designers adored her because she made their work look effortless. Photographers loved her because she brought truth to every image. Other models respected her because she never played politics or tried to steal their jobs. But this authenticity was also making her something of an outsider in her own industry. Fashion thrives on transformation, on the idea that you can become someone completely different. Yasmeen was proving that some people are just themselves, no matter what they're wearing. She walked in shows wearing millions of dollars worth of clothing, her face on magazine covers around the world, her name mentioned alongside the biggest stars of the era. But she never seemed to buy into the mythology of her own fame. Friends from that time remember her as surprisingly normal. She'd show up to a shoot, do the work beautifully, and then want to talk about books or politics or anything except fashion. She treated modeling like a job, not an identity. This was revolutionary in its own quiet way. In an industry that told women they needed to be perfect, to be constantly performing, Yasmeen was just herself. The industry didn't know what to do with someone who succeeded without compromising. Someone who could be photographed in the most luxurious clothes in the world and still seem like a real person underneath. But maybe that's exactly why what happened next was inevitable. October 1996. Yasmeen is scheduled to walk in an Yves Saint Laurent show, one of the most prestigious bookings in fashion. At the last minute, she pulls out. No explanation, no apology, just gone. A few months later, in 1997, she walks in another YSL show. The same hypnotic walk, the same perfect professionalism. But somewhere during that show, she makes a decision that will shock an industry built on the worship of youth and beauty. She's done. At 26 years old, at the absolute peak of her career, with money flowing in and everyone telling her she could work for another decade easily, Yasmeen decides to retire from modeling. No scandal forced her out, no addiction, no breakdown, no devastating review. She wasn't getting older or less beautiful or less relevant. If anything, she was more in demand than ever. She just stopped. The industry didn't understand it then, and honestly, it still doesn't understand it now. Models don't retire at their peak. They fade gradually, take smaller jobs, move into different areas of fashion. They don't walk away from millions of dollars and global fame because they feel like it. But that's exactly what Yasmeen did. She finished her commitments, said goodbye to the people who mattered, and disappeared. Within months, she was married to Ralph Bernstein, a Jewish lawyer who had nothing to do with fashion. They moved to upstate New York, about as far from the runways of Paris as you could get. The contrast was stunning. One day, she was walking for the world's most famous designers. The next day, she was a newlywed in suburban New York, learning to build a life that had nothing to do with beauty or fashion or fame. Her children would be raised Jewish, even though she'd grown up Muslim. Her husband was from a completely different world. Everything about her new life was a choice, not an inheritance. What happened next was almost as remarkable as the career that preceded it. Yasmeen vanished. Not dramatically, not with any announcement or farewell tour. She just stepped out of the fashion world and never looked back. While other supermodels from her era made comebacks, launched businesses, appeared in documentaries, Yasmeen chose silence. Complete, total, almost mystical silence. For 25 years, she raised her children, daughter Maya and son Victor, in upstate New York. She reportedly did philanthropic work, but kept those efforts private. She didn't give interviews, didn't appear at fashion events, didn't even show up to reunions. Meanwhile, fashion moved on without her, but never quite forgot her. As the industry slowly began to embrace diversity in the 2000s and 2010s, fashion historians started recognizing what Yasmeen had accomplished. She was cited as a pioneer, one of the first women of color to break through at the highest levels. Her influence was acknowledged in retrospectives, but the woman herself remained invisible. Other models from her era stayed visible in various ways. They appeared on reality shows, judged modeling competitions, married celebrities, started skincare lines. The machinery of fame found ways to keep them relevant. Yasmeen wanted none of it. Her absence became part of her legend. Fashion people would mention her in the same breath as Naomi and Linda and Christy, but always with a note of mystery. Whatever happened to Yasmeen became a recurring question. It was almost unheard of. Someone who'd tasted that level of fame and success, who'd been told they were among the most beautiful women in the world, choosing obscurity and finding peace there. The industry that had once struggled to categorize her now had to grapple with her absence. In a business built on the idea that fame is the ultimate goal, Yasmeen had proved that some people want something else entirely. June 2022. After 25 years of silence, a photo appears on Instagram that makes the fashion world stop everything. It's simple, casual, two women having coffee, smiling at the camera. One is Helena Christensen, the Danish supermodel who'd remained visible over the decades. The other is Yasmeen, silver streaks in her hair, wearing no makeup, looking exactly like what she is. A woman in her 50s who's lived a full life away from cameras. The caption is understated, writes something about reconnecting with an old friend after 25 years. But the response is immediate and overwhelming. Fashion industry veterans flood the comments. Christy Turlington and Amber Valletta express how much they've missed seeing Yasmeen. Bella Hadid calls them legends. The post goes viral in fashion circles, not because of anything dramatic or scandalous, but because of pure affection. What's striking about the reaction isn't just the love, but the respect. No one asks why she left, no one pressures her to come back, no one treats her return to social media as anything other than a gift. There's an understanding that she'd earned the right to disappear, and that her reappearance, however brief, should be celebrated without demands. A few more posts follow. Yasmeen shares photos from her modeling days, acknowledges messages from old friends, gives glimpses into her current life focused on family and charitable work. But there's no comeback announcement, no hint that she wants to return to modeling. It's clear she's not trying to reclaim her spot in fashion. She's just saying hello. She'd proved that walking away from fame doesn't diminish your impact. If anything, her absence had enhanced her reputation. She wasn't remembered as someone who'd clung to relevance or struggled to redefine herself after modeling. She was remembered as someone who'd known exactly when to stop. The coffee date with Helena became a symbol of something larger, the possibility of authentic friendship in an industry built on competition, the power of choosing privacy over publicity, the courage to be vulnerable without performative elements. Here were two women who'd been photographed by the world's greatest artists, who'd walked the most prestigious runways, who'd been told they were among the most beautiful women of their generation, and they were having coffee like any two friends who hadn't seen each other in decades. The silver in Yasmeen's hair wasn't hidden or apologized for. Her face, without professional makeup or lighting, was still striking, but more importantly, it was peaceful. This was what contentment looked like. In that single photo, she'd given the fashion world something it rarely sees. Proof that there's life after fame, happiness after walking away, authenticity that survives decades of silence. She'd been too real for an industry built on illusion. But in the end, that realness had made her legendary. In a world that tells women to chase youth and relevance forever, Yasmeen chose something different. She chose to be human. And somehow that made her more iconic than any campaign or cover ever could.